Okay, welcome in, one and all. I'm now going to be reviewing all of Week 14's action of the NFL. I'll be saying who I thought would win, who actually won, and the scores and where the teams are in the standings, I should say, or the record as of this time. So the Thursday night matchup took place in the Steel City between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New England Patriots. I did honestly think that the Steelers would be able to get the victory in this one, but it was not meant to be as the Patriots pulled off a shocker. 21-18 is the final score in this one. With that, the Patriots now finally got their third win of the season. It just took 14 weeks for them to do that. They are sitting at 3-10, and despite the loss, the Steelers are still a game above 500, but it is very crowded in that AFC wild card. A lot of teams have the same record now, and the Steelers are one of them at 7-6. All right, the Sunday's action. The first game takes place in the NFC South, where we had, I should say, the Atlanta Falcons, and they were playing host to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I did make my prediction, and I did think Atlanta would be able to get the victory in this one, but unfortunately, it was not meant to be. The final score, 29-25. With that, both of these teams are now sitting at 6-7, and I know I made this point a few times, is that because that NFC South is so weak and all the teams pretty much have all the same records, that it's going to be a very tight division, and it'll be interesting to see who can get that crown by the time the schedule is all said and done. All right, the next matchup takes place in Baltimore, where we had the Ravens, and they're playing host to the Los Angeles Rams. So I did predict that Baltimore would get the victory in this one, and they did. A high-scoring affair, to say the least. 37-31 would be the final score in this one. The Ravens have now got their 10th win of the season. With the loss, the Rams are now 6-7. So I should say the Ravens are 10-3. So far I'm 1-2 with the picks. We'll see how I do the rest of the way. The next matchup takes place in the NFC North, where we had the Chicago Bears, and they're playing against the NFC North leading Detroit Lions. So I think a lot of people, including myself, figured that the Lions would have been able to get the victory in this one, considering they had such a great lead in the standings. But unfortunately, the Bears ruined that. The final score in this one would be 28-13. So this Lions team looked like they were going to be roaring into the playoffs and being an absolutely juggernaut of a team, considering how dominant they have been throughout the majority of this season. But because they've been playing so poorly lately, it really makes you question how great this team really is. So with that, the Chicago Bears are 5-8, and with the loss, the Lions are still 9-4. So they still have a very good record, but it's looking like other teams could be creeping up behind them to play catch up, and that could be very dangerous, especially this late in the year. All right, the next matchup takes place in Ohio, where we have the Cincinnati Bengals, and they're playing host to the Indianapolis Colts. So I did predict that the Bengals would get the victory, despite the fact that neither team has their starting quarterback, and they did okay. The final score in this one would be 34-14. So they beat the Colts by 20 points. With that, both these teams are now sitting at 7-6. So just like I mentioned when I talked about the Steelers, there's a lot of teams that have that 7-6 record. So it'll be very interesting to see who can prevail and get those final 3 wild card spots in the AFC. Sticking in Ohio, we have yet another AFC versus AFC North versus AFC South battle. The Cleveland Browns, they were playing host to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just like the previous matchup that I talked about, neither of these teams had their starting quarterback. So it was very. I had a funny feeling that if when Trevor Lawrence went down with his injury, that'd be a tough road ahead for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And yeah, we'll put it like that. It was a close game to say the least, 31-27. So just a one-score game. By the end of that, with the victory, the Browns are now improved to 8-5, and with the loss, the Jaguars are sitting at 8-5 as well. So both have the same record. Obviously, for the Jaguars, they still have that very slim lead in that AFC South division, as I believe both the Colts and the Texans are still breathing down their necks to potentially take over that uh, division lead. And as for the Browns, every win can really help this team moving forward into securing a playoff position. The next matchup takes place in the NFC South, where we have the New Orleans Saints. They were taking on the Carolina Panthers. I did predict that the Saints would get the victory in this one, and they sure did. The final score on this one would be 30-6. They won 24 points. With that, the Saints, along with the Buccaneers and the Falcons, are sitting at 6-7. So it's pretty much like a three-way tie for first in that division. And as for the Panthers, it's just been a very long and miserable season. They have now dropped to 1-12. All right, the next matchup takes place in New York, where we had the New York Jets, and they were playing against the Houston Texans. I thought because of how fantastic the Texans have been playing all season and how surprising that they have been, and that CJ Stroud is no doubtably got to be in the running for Rookie of the Year. It all seemed like it just came crashing when they got to New York. The final score on this one would be 30-6. So the Jets have been questionable, to say the least. They've had some games that they look really good, and other games that they've absolutely looked like crap, poo. I'm going to be honest with you. And as for the Texans, as I just said before they came into this matchup, they're looking like a very good team. And honestly, had they got the win, maybe they could have been able to take over that AFC South. They're still in the running for a playoff position, but because the Colts are ahead of them in the standings, even though they both have the same record, the Texans, I believe, are still eighth in that AFC conference, if I want to be honest with you. So, a tough loss for the Texans. We'll see if they can have a bounce back game next week. But yeah, this was a tough one to swallow if you're a Texans fan, to say the least, because this was a game you probably had circled on your schedule, thinking, okay, the Jets have not been playing that great. We should be able to get the victory. And unfortunately, it was not meant to be. All right, the next matchup takes place in Las Vegas, where we have the Raiders, and they're taking on the Minnesota Vikings. So I don't think anyone would have predicted the game the way it was. I did think the Raiders would have been able to get the victory in this one. They were not able to. Not only were they shut out, but they lost by 3 points. The final score, believe it or not, was 3-0. So if only the Raiders had been able to get a field goal, the game could have went into overtime, or if only they had been able to get a touchdown, they could have been able to get the victory, as they obviously held the Vikings without a touchdown, but they didn't get a touchdown themselves. They didn't get a field goal themselves. So a very low-scoring affair. It's very scarce. You only have a field goal throughout 60 minutes of play. It just goes to show how dominant both defenses are and how weak both offenses are in this. So with the loss, the Raiders have now dropped to 5-8, and with the loss, the Minnesota Vikings are 6-7. All right, off to the NFC West, where we had the San Francisco 49ers, and they were playing host to the Seattle Seahawks. I did predict the 49ers would get the victory in this one, and they surely did. The final score would be 28-16. With that, the San Francisco 49ers are now sitting at 10-3. They're the first team to get an X beside their name, as in they have secured a playoff position. And with the loss, the Seahawks are now at 6-7. All right. Next matchup takes place in Missouri, where we have the Kansas City Chiefs, and they played host to the Buffalo Bills. I did predict that the Bills would get the victory in this one. I didn't think it would come in a controversial way. Well, I mean, if you're a Chiefs fan or you're Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, it came in a controversial finish. But I've seen the highlights and I've seen that play about Kadarius Toney, if I'm not mistaken. He was offside, and what could have been an incredible game-winning touchdown as Mahomes passed it to Kelsey, and then Kelsey did a lateral to Kadarius Toney, who then had an open field to run in for a touchdown. But because he lined up offside, the play got called back, and a few more plays later, the game was over, and the Bills ended up stealing this one away from home. So for the Bills, this was a much needed win. They are still 10th in that division or 11th in that AFC, so they still have quite a ways to climb, but this was a huge victory to say the least for that squad. As for the Chiefs, a tough pill to swallow. This is now their second loss in a row, and I think I read a stat that said like they've lost now 3 of the last 4 or 4 of the last 5, so it's hard to believe, as dominant as this Chiefs team is, they're looking inconsistent at the worst time of the year. So despite the loss, the Chiefs are still 3 games above 500, sitting at 8-5. And with the victory, like I've said with any team in the AFC, it's very crowded in that wild card spot. The Buffalo Bills are sitting at 7-6. All right, the next matchup is an AFC West showdown between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Denver Broncos. I did predict Denver would get the victory in this one, and they surely did. The final score would be 24-7. With the victory, the Broncos have joined like 5 other teams in that very crowded AFC wildcard spot at 7-6. And with the loss, the Chargers have now dropped to 5-8. Excuse me. All right. The Sunday night matchup took place in Dallas, where we had the Cowboys, and they were playing host to the Philadelphia Eagles. I thought after the Eagles got absolutely destroyed by the 49ers in Week 13 that they'd be able to have a bounce-back week against their division rivals. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be. They lost by 20 points. 33-13 would be the final score in this one. With that, both these teams are now sitting at 10-3, but because the Cowboys defeated the Eagles, the Cowboys have now taken over that NFC East division lead, and the Eagles, who looked so dominant and who were like the number 1 team in the league at one point, have now fallen to a wild card position. There's still 4 more weeks to play in football, so there's nothing set in stone just yet, but a very tough blow if you're an Eagles fan, to say the least. All right, 2 Monday night matchups took place just last night. The first one was in Florida, where we had the Miami Dolphins, and they were playing host to the Tennessee Titans. I think everybody and their parents would have guessed, and their grandparents would have guessed, that the Dolphins would be able to defeat a team below 500, considering they've defeated every other team up until this point that has a below 500 record. But unfortunately, the Tennessee Titans came into Miami and pulled off a huge upset, to say the least. The final score on this one would be 28-27. So just a 1-point differential in this one. With that victory, the Titans are 5-8. And with the loss, the Miami Dolphins are now sitting at 9-4. Still, they are still leading that AFC East division, but a win here could have went a long way in not only securing a playoff spot, but potentially getting a AFC East crown for the first time since 2008, 2009. So a tough loss if you're a Dolphins fan. They still, like I said, every team has 4 more games left respectively. So maybe in the next couple of weeks, they'll be able to finally secure their first division crown in well over a decade. And as for the Titans, they're just playing spoilers at this point, as they're still 3 games below 500. It would take a miracle for this team to get into the playoffs. All right, the last matchup took place in New York, where we had the host team and the Giants, and they're taking on the Green Bay Packers. Because the Packers have been playing so well recently, I did pick them to get a win over the Giants, but it was not meant to be. The final score on this one would be 24-22 in favor of the G-Men. So obviously a huge victory for the Giants, considering how poorly they started off the season playing. And as for the Packers, this is a major blow. Yes, they're still in contention. Yes, they're still in a wild card spot, but a victory here really could have helped them. It just really could have helped them. Like I said, they've been playing so great. I mean, after you come off victories over the Chiefs, you think that you'd be able to get a win over the Giants, who are nowhere near a playoff position, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. But, I mean, as I've always said, anything can happen on any given Sunday. So with the loss, the Packers are sitting at 6-7, and with the victory, the Giants are 5-8. So just a one-game difference between the two of them in the standings. But yeah, for the Packers, again, a pretty tough loss to take, in my opinion. So for the first time this season, I finished below 500, I believe. I may have to go check on my paper just to double check. But yeah, 7-8 were my predictions. Sorry, 7-8 was my record after my predictions for Week 14. The two teams that had their bye week, I did go over this in the preview, but I will just do it again. The Cardinals were off Week 14. Their record is 3-10, and the Washington Commanders were off. They're at 4-9. So my overall record after 14 weeks of football is 117-71. So I'm still above 500, but again, this was a pretty tough week. Like I said, after going 7-8. All right, that takes care of my Week 14 recap of the NFL. I will have my preview for Week 15 uploaded tomorrow. As always, if you like this type of content and you're new to this channel, please feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative at the same time. And as always, take care.